The OG Dragon Ball Z legendary Super Saiyan. I think it's fair to say that he has more hype than any other filler character in Dragon Ball, ever. So much so that he's not even filler anymore. He's been made canon on 2 separate occasions with 2 different iterations of him. But we don't care about those right now. We're here today to talk about the OG, the sadistic psychopath, the brutal brawler, the beast incarnate, the true freak, Broly. Z Broly is a simple but very effective character that was introduced in the movie Broly, the Legendary Super Saiyan, which released in 1993. Something I want to make a quick point of is that there's a couple different iterations of this. This is still around the time where the English dub was getting a lot of errors in translation, so there's a few different variations of this movie. Personally, I love the 2003 Funimation English dub release. This one has this glorious grunge rock music that just fits Broly's character, and watching him without it just doesn't do the character justice. I'll touch on that later though, but for now, let's talk some more about the character. Broly's design is incredible, as is the animation for almost all of his movies. We won't talk about that third one. But he is arguably the most physically imposing character in Dragon Ball. Normally, Dragon Ball likes to show a juxtaposition. Someone who appears small and weak is very strong. Think Final Form Frieza, Kid Goku, Kid Gohan, Vegeta being short, even through Kid Buu. This is just something that Dragon Ball likes to do. Akira Toriyama is a fan of it. But with Broly, he is as powerful as he looks. In the past, when we've had guys like this, think Raccoon or Nappa, they were underneath somebody. They weren't the main guy. They got to be that imposing figure to the underlings or to the rest of the Z fighters, but when it came time to face Goku, flatlined very quickly. Broly, on the other hand, is the main villain. The closest he comes to answering to somebody is his father, and he crushes him inside of a ship and throws him into another planet. This man is different, and we love that, along with the clothing that he's designed with. If Beerus was never around, this is what I would picture the God of Destruction would look like. Equal parts royalty and gladiator, and he's so much taller and bigger than everybody else that he just stands out no matter where he's drawn. That combined with his menacing and identifiable soundtrack, along with the most brutal beatdowns in Dragon Ball, you have the makings for a fan favorite character. And I'm not just chatting here. Something feels different about when Broly destroys people versus other one-sided fights in Dragon Ball. With Frieza, it felt sick. With Vegeta, it's always entertaining because I was talking through it. But with Broly, it is just so satisfying watching him just tear through the Z fighters, chasing down 3 Super Saiyans at once and just mashing them through buildings. Watching Z Broly go to work in his first film is like watching a hack and slash horror film with Jason Voorhees. This man brings about primal emotions, especially when he says lines like, "How much do you love your son?" That y'all need to understand, this man is dangerous and means what he says. Y'all, Broly looked at a group of enslaved children, saw that they were crying, wanting to go back to their home planet, and then blew it up for no other reason than for pure joy on his part and terrified screams of defeat on their side. So when he makes threats, backs them up immediately in the most impressive fashion that you'll ever see, with drums and guitars and screaming going on in the background. You're experiencing Broly, and nobody else can give you that feeling that he gives when he gets on screen. I imagine Z Broly is what GT wanted when they made Super 17, who didn't make sense, by the way. All that to say though, Z Broly has aura. But he also has flaws. So Z Broly has his motivation and his backstory exposition dumped on us by his father Paragus. Side note, I believe in show don't tell, so I'm not really a fan of exposition dumps. But back to the story. Paragus tells us that Broly was stabbed as a child at the order of King Vegeta because he was afraid of his power. He didn't want anyone outranking his son and possibly challenging him for the throne. For context, Goku, when he was born as a newborn, had a power level of 2. Broly's power level was 10,000, which is more than Nappa during the Saiyan saga. As a newborn, this power level is OD, and it also doesn't make any sense, especially when you're gonna have newborn Broly stabbed by a low-level warrior and do nothing about it. Yes, I understand it's because he's an infant, and yes, that is why his power level shouldn't have been 10k. When Paragus stops to ask himself why Broly seems so against Goku, he freezes up, looks afraid, and says, "They were born on the same day." And we get a flashback of Saiyans looking at baby Goku and looking at baby Broly. Broly is chilling, and they're talking about how powerful he is, and then they look at Goku and how weak he is, and Goku starts crying, which makes Broly start crying, and the Saiyans laugh about how Goku is annoying Broly. We then cut to Broly being agitated about it to this day, and that's it. Nothing more is shown. Now, I've heard fan theories that Broly was just really powerful as a baby, and he wasn't annoyed by Goku crying as he was annoyed by Goku not submitting to his power. But that theory just doesn't make sense, and it's not based in anything shown in the film. If Broly was really annoyed by people not bowing down to his power, why wouldn't he care about the person who put a dagger through him? Or, stop that if he's cognizant of his power. People also forget Broly was holding it down, low-key, keeping his rage under control until Goku came on the scene. Prior to that, Vegeta was cocky as heck, there to be treated like a king, ordering and bossing people around, and Broly was okay being his calm lackey that didn't do anything. If he really cared about pride and you have to bow down to me that much, he wouldn't have been that calm, and he wouldn't get triggered seeing Goku do the same thing that Vegeta was doing. Prior to making this video, I thought that everyone knew that Broly's motivation was just because Goku was crying, because people have lamented about how stupid that was for years, but I just recently became aware of that theory, and I just had to shoot it down really quick. Guys, Broly's motivation is stupid, and that's okay. We didn't go to see Broly for some creative writing masterpiece. We came to see him mess things up, and he does wonderfully. That aside now, another criticism of him is that he's one-dimensional, which he kind of is. Much more so in the second movie and that god-awful third movie. But even so, even the first movie, he serves as a killing machine who delivers cold, ruthless lines. This isn't somebody that you build a long-form story with. He's made for a movie, and he does that perfectly. So Z Broly being one-dimensional isn't even that much of a slight on him. He wasn't built for a series. This was a character introduced for a movie that did so well that they had 2 sequels. Also, one-dimensional isn't always a slight. It can just be used to describe something. Jason Voorhees is one-dimensional. Michael Myers is one-dimensional. Shoot, Godzilla is one-dimensional. And that's okay, because if you have a character used for a specific purpose, as long as you fulfill that purpose in the right way, then being one-dimensional isn't a problem. And therefore, it is just fine with Z Broly. Now, the biggest problem and worst thing going against Z Broly is how he performed in his second and third movies. Personally, I'm actually a fan of the second movie as a whole. I think it's really fun, and I think Gohan is portrayed there better than he was in Z and in Super. But Broly himself was not portrayed well in the second movie. He becomes that screaming Kakarot idiot that people criticize him for being online. That is where the problem comes from. In the first movie, he was fine. But in the second movie, his vocabulary dumbs down to one word, and they weaken him. And by the third movie, he is completely unrecognizable. I will go as far to say that if Dragon Ball Evolution didn't exist, Bio Broly would be the worst piece of Dragon Ball content ever made by anybody. And that's really the worst part about Broly, aside from his backstory and motivation. Now, that doesn't apply to the first movie. So if you only keep your thoughts and opinions to Broly to the legendary Super Saiyan movie, then that doesn't apply and he remains fine. But calling out his performance in the next two films is definitely a valid point to make. When it comes to my personal opinions on Z Broly, I love him. I think that he's great for what he was brought in for, which is to be a monstrous brute who is scary and just has an aura to him. When they say that Frieza killed off an entire group of people to avoid one legendary Super Saiyan being born, Broly is the one that makes that make sense. And watching his first movie will always be a fun time. As far as who I prefer between him and Dragon Ball Super's Broly, they're not comparable if you ask me. They're just entirely different characters made for entirely different purposes. And I'll speak on Dragon Ball Super Broly in another video. But for right now, DBZ Broly is hard.